Have you ever felt your life shatter in the span of 15 minutes? Claire Adams knew that feeling well, standing frozen in the fluorescent-lit conference room as the termination letter slid across the polished oak table. Her manager, Karen Douglas. 38 nails painted a meticulous crimson eyes, cold and unwavering, didn't flinch as she spoke. "You violated reporting protocol," she said. Voice flat, practiced, rehearsed. Claire's throat tightened, pulse spiking. The hum of the heater sounded too loud, the whir of the overhead fluorescent lights too sharp, echoing in the emptiness of Northwind Manufacturing. Most employees had left hours ago, chasing Christmas dinners, wrapping paper, the warmth of family. Claire had been asked to stay late. Just a formality, Karen had said. Now the formality was a death sentence. Her hands trembled as she touched the edges of the letter. 15 minutes to clear her desk. No severance. Health insurance terminated at midnight. She tried to breathe. She thought of her mother Ellen, 60, fragile and pale. The pills lined like soldiers along the nightstand. Each tablet a lifeline. Each tablet a countdown. Without coverage, without money, the heart medicine might not come. The irony struck Claire had created the very efficiency model that had saved Northwind thousands of labor hours, a project she had worked on in silence for 4 months, and now she was disposable. The corridor outside the conference room was empty, fluorescent reflections bouncing off the linoleum floor. She walked past rows of desks, the hum of computers, sleeping keyboards dark. Mr. Thompson, the night security guard, 63, his skin lined from decades of late shifts, watched her pass from behind his desk. He didn't speak. He rarely did. But the flicker in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw carried understanding. He had seen employees come and go, talented ones, swallowed by bureaucracy, brilliance ignored. Claire's departure wasn't news to him, it was expected. And yet, something in her posture, the way her shoulders squared despite the fear, made him note the time, the date, the injustice. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting onto the empty loading dock. Claire's breath fogged in the cold as she paused, thinking about the emails she had sent, the charts she had meticulously coded, the algorithms that would now bear someone else's name. Karen's grin had never reached her eyes, but her hands, sliding the letter across the table, had been precise, deliberate. The theft was clinical. On the bus ride home, Claire didn't cry. Tears demanded energy she didn't have. She counted alarms she would set for the early morning bakery shift recipes she would knead mechanically, as if muscle memory could replace sleep hunger and despair. Rent was due in 6 days. Mother's next cardiology appointment was in 9. The refill for the heart medication couldn't wait past Thursday. Every detail a ticking bomb, every responsibility a chain around her ankles. By 5:30 a.m., she was in the bakery, dusting flour across her flower-shaped fingers, kneading dough while running algorithms in her mind. She imagined the factory lines at Northwind stations feeding into stations' variables, overlooked cycles unbalanced. The work of weeks and months playing over in her mind as she formed the dough. Mrs. Miller, 65. The owner noticed the tired slump in her shoulders. "You're quieter than usual," she said, sliding trays of croissants into the industrial oven. Claire forced a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Just tired," she murmured, voice flat, carrying the weight of a life compressed into the span of a single night. The cafe shift began at 2 p.m., 6 grinding hours, greeting customers with forced cheer eyes, tracking every tip, every coin, every dollar needed to keep the lights on, the heat running the pills in their bottles. Couples laughed over desserts, unaware of the calculus playing in her head, the exact percentage of each order required to cover rent, utilities, medication. By 9 p.m., she returned home, finding her mother seated in the armchair, television casting bluish shadows over the lined pill bottles. You work too hard, sweetheart, Ellen said, voice soft but carrying the weight of worry, a small smile hiding concern. Claire kissed her mother's forehead, thin skin warm beneath her lips, and whispered, I just need you not to give up. The laptop called to her. Freelance data analysis projects awaited small contracts that paid enough to cover medicine but nothing else. Tonight's assignment, supply chain optimization for a local textile manufacturer. Work she could do, half asleep. The clock ticked. Rent appointments, refills, all aligned with precision only her mind could manage. As she scrolled through news alerts, one headline froze. Her Northwind Manufacturing announced a major partnership with InspiringStories. Revolutionary efficiency model projected 40% cost reduction. Claire's fingers hovered trembling. The charts were hers. Every spreadsheet, every optimization her work. Karen had claimed the credit. Her heart pounded not just with disbelief, but with the sick twist of betrayal. The model that had cost her job now generated headlines. Karen pictured with the CEO accepting congratulations, oblivious to the truth. Claire clenched her fists, the paper-thin skin on her knuckles biting into her palms. She wanted to scream. She wanted the world to see. And yet there was no one to witness. She was invisible. 3 days later, rejection emails arrived. We were impressed with your portfolio, one read, but cannot proceed without a professional reference from your most recent employer. Northwind's HR robotic indifferent repeated Karen's decree, not eligible for rehire. Without a reference, no firm would hire her. Freelance clients began canceling contracts, skeptical of credentials she could no longer prove. Claire's life was eroding not abruptly, but with the slow, suffocating pressure of air leaking from a tire. Then came a spark. In the corner of the local cafe, a man hunched over a blueprint, calculations sprawled across the table. Focused, meticulous, oblivious to the world. Claire noticed the pressure points in the design, the flow inefficiencies. She could see instantly where the bottlenecks would collapse, production the error invisible to ordinary eyes. Her hand trembled as she made one small adjustment, a pencil mark, redirecting the flow. The man looked up, eyes sharp, analytical. "Did you do this?" he asked, voice even calm, assessing. Claire froze. I couldn't help it," she whispered. His gaze pierced, but not with anger. He gestured to the seat across. "Sit. Explain everything." Her pulse raced. A door had opened, a chance to speak truth to power. The man, Holt Warner, 52 CEO of Easton Industries, held her adjustments, recognized the handwriting, the intuition, the knowledge she had poured into the model Karen had stolen. "Your name?" he asked. "Claire Adams." Recognition flickered. The model Easton was implementing, the one making headlines, was hers. Holt's expression hardened, a mixture of awe and disbelief, the beginning of reckoning. Behind her, Mr. Thompson, the night security guard, had kept meticulous records for decades, noting stolen work, unacknowledged contributions, patterns of abuse by Karen Douglas. He had waited for someone with authority to act, and now, with Holt Warner, the reckoning had begun. The clock-ticked snow continued falling outside the cafe window, but inside, Claire Adams was no longer invisible. Not because the world had changed, but because she had finally stepped forward, refusing to let her brilliance be erased. The busyness of the city outside, the lights of Chicago reflecting off snow-dusted streets, the aroma of baked bread in the cafe, the faint hum of heating ducts, all framed a moment of transformation. Power, theft, injustice, and resilience coalesced in a single point of clarity. Someone saw her. Someone with authority. And the story that had been silenced would now demand to be heard. The air crackled with tension, a silent promise of confrontation, and the scene set the stage for a boardroom showdown that would expose betrayal, reward integrity, and deliver justice. Claire Adams spent the next morning in the bakery before sunrise, kneading dough as if she could shape not only the bread, but her own fractured life. Her hands were dusted with flour, cold air drifting in from the open door, carrying the faint smell of melting snow and exhaust from the quiet street outside. Every motion was precise, mechanical, but her mind raced through schedules, deadlines, rent, and medications. She counted hours backward in her head, calculating the tips she needed to cover her mother's prescriptions, factoring in overtime at the cafe later. Mrs. Miller, the bakery owner, placed a tray of croissants into the oven with a hiss and a puff of heat. She glanced at Claire, her brow furrowed. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, voice soft-edged with concern. Claire forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, nodding. "Just thinking," she whispered, "about everything that needs to be done." Mrs. Miller's eyes lingered a moment longer, as if sensing the weight she carried, then returned to the oven, leaving Claire to her silent calculations. By mid-morning, Claire was heading to the cafe, the small bell over the door jingling as she pushed inside. The cafe was warm, but bustling sunlight catching the surface of the wooden tables, glinting on spoons and cups. She slipped behind the counter, apron tied a tray ready, greeting the first customers with the practiced calm that belied her inner turmoil. Every coffee, every pastry handed over, every smile forced, was a fraction of her energy spent keeping the world from noticing the storm she carried inside. The morning passed in a rhythm of orders, lattes, and polite nods. Claire's hands moved swiftly, her eyes scanning the room, her mind elsewhere. She counted tips as they came, calculating the rent due in 6 days, her mother's cardiology appointment in 9, the medication refill that had to be in the pharmacy by Thursday, the unpaid electric bill. Each small transaction carried the weight of survival. Her body ached from fatigue, but she moved with the precision of someone who had no choice but to endure. At noon, a small mishap snapped her from her calculations. A tray tipped, spilling a latte across the counter. Claire froze, eyes wide, heart racing. The customer's frown deepened. "It's all right," she said quickly, grabbing napkins, cleaning the spill, keeping her voice steady, even as her pulse surged. A coworker shot her a look, one of those casual glances that carried judgment, but Claire ignored it, bending to her task, as if grounding herself in the work could stabilize her life. After the lunch rush, she retreated to the back room to gulp cold water, wiping her hands on a threadbare towel. Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification on her small laptop, a news alert about Northwind's partnership announcement with Easton Industries. Claire's fingers hovered over the keys. The model, the one she had designed, the one Karen had stolen, was now making headlines. Karen's name appeared alongside the CEO's, taking full credit. The betrayal was palpable, the injustice sharp, a physical ache in her chest. Her hands trembled, then clenched into fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted someone to see the theft, to feel it with her. Her shift ended at 2 p.m., but Claire's work was far from over. She returned home briefly to check on her mother. Ellen was reading, eyes weary, the faint scent of menthol from her inhaler in the room. Claire kissed her forehead gently, careful not to wake her, and whispered, "I'll make this right." There was no reply, only the steady tick of the wall clock and the faint hum of the heater. The weight of responsibility pressed down heavy and relentless. By 3:30, she was back on the road to the next freelance assignment, a small office where a local textile manufacturer awaited her analysis on supply chain efficiency. The office was quiet, fluorescent lights buzzing above the air, carrying a faint scent of paper coffee and plastic from packaging samples stacked on the table. Claire unpacked her laptop and began reviewing data, the cursor blinking steadily as if marking time-demanding precision. She worked quickly, the algorithms unfolding under her fingers, every calculation meticulous, aware that each decimal, each minor adjustment could be the difference between failure and survival. An hour into her analysis, a man entered, pausing at the doorway. He was tall, mid-50s, well-dressed, carrying an air of authority that made the room shrink around him. Claire looked up briefly, unsure if she should speak. "Excuse me," he said, voice even, "but carrying weight, is anyone familiar with supply chain projections here?" Claire's heart skipped. He glanced at the charts she had pulled, the annotated graphs, the spreadsheets littered with notes. "I think there may be an inefficiency here," he added, eyes narrowing on a bottleneck she had already highlighted. Claire swallowed, pulse hammering. She stood, moving to the table. "I can explain," she said softly, words precise, controlled. Her fingers pointed to the sections where the flow was off, cycle times misaligned. The man listened, tilting his head, expression unreadable. She elaborated, showing the upstream causes, the implications for labor and cost. Each word was measured, confident, even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. When she finished, he leaned back, eyes scanning her work, then finally met hers. This is exceptional," he said slowly, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. "Who prepared this?" Claire's voice caught slightly. "I did," she said the truth, simple and unadorned. A pause, then a faint nod. "I see," he murmured. Something shifted in the room. The weight of recognition, the validation, was almost a physical force pressing down on her shoulders. He introduced himself as Holt Warner, CEO of Easton Industries. The implications began to settle in Claire's mind. Holt was not here by chance. He had been evaluating the partnership with Northwind, and the model she had created, the one Karen had stolen, was the very blueprint under discussion. Her pulse quickened. This was the opening she had been waiting for, the intersection of justice and opportunity. Before either of them spoke again, Mr. Thompson, the night security guard, entered quietly, notebook in hand. He was the only other person who had kept track of Karen's pattern over the years: stolen work, unrecognized employees, careers derailed. His eyes met Claire's, a silent communication passing between them. This was the moment. Holt's gaze returned to her, sharp, calculating. "We need to verify this fully," he said, tone decisive. "And we need the original files. I want to know who truly created this." Claire exhaled slowly, a mixture of fear and hope. The snow outside the office window continued to fall, dusting the city in a blanket of white. The room, ordinary and quiet moments before, now seemed charged with potential. The ordinary had collided with the extraordinary. A single act of diligence, a single refusal to be invisible, had brought her here. As she gathered her notes and files, Holt added, almost to himself, "No one should ever be erased for doing their work well." Claire's fingers lingered on the edge of her spreadsheet. The boardroom showdown was inevitable, the reckoning long overdue. And for the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself a small thought. Maybe, just maybe, the world was about to see her. Outside, the city carried on indifferent, but inside that small office, the scales of justice had begun to tilt. Holt Warner's recognition was more than validation. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would expose betrayal, reward integrity, and change lives. Claire Adams, once invisible, was now visible. Every note, every calculation, every late night of silent toil had led to this precipice. She could feel it in the sharp bite of the winter air coming through the window, in the flicker of the fluorescent lights, in the intensity of Holt's gaze. The story was far from over, but the first chapter of justice had begun. Claire Adams left the small office with her laptop clutched to her chest, the winter sunlight hitting the streets of Chicago, bouncing off the wet pavement, and turning puddles into liquid mirrors. She walked briskly, not because she wanted to, but because she had no time to linger. The city felt both enormous and indifferent, a blur of horns, footsteps, and the occasional shriek of a distant siren. Each step carried the weight of her mother's health, the unpaid bills, and the looming confrontation she knew would come with the Northwind board. By 9 a.m., she was back at the bakery. her hands dusted with flour, again repeating motions she had memorized over countless shifts, kneading, folding, shaping. Each movement was methodical, precise, almost meditative, yet her mind refused to rest. She replayed the meeting with Holt over and over, calculating the sequence of steps she would need to take to substantiate her claims. Every spreadsheet, every email, every timestamp mattered. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, craving the reassurance of tangible data in a world that had been indifferent to her presence. Mrs. Miller noticed immediately. "Claire, you're pale," she said, eyes scanning her face for the signs of exhaustion she could no longer hide. Claire gave a small, tight-lipped smile, pressing her hands into the dough, kneading until her knuckles burned. "I'm fine," she said, voice firm but low. Her heart pounded beneath her chest as if it knew the battle ahead. She couldn't allow weakness to show, not now, not ever. The cafe was next. By mid-morning, Claire was bustling behind the counter trays, clinking coffee machines, hissing customers, chattering without pause. She moved fluidly with a rhythm that had become second nature, but each interaction was calculated, each smile measured. She observed, noted, catalogued. The man who came in every Tuesday at exactly 11:45 with his laptop open, the elderly couple who shared quiet glances over cappuccinos, the teenager studying while headphones draped around his neck. All part of the living tableau she used to ground herself when the weight of injustice pressed in. Then shortly after noon, it happened. A delivery arrived for the cafe, a large box of fresh pastries for the afternoon rush. Claire bent to lift it, fingers brushing the surface of the box, and froze. A small slip of paper fell out a note she hadn't seen before. Her pulse spiked. She opened it, eyes scanning quickly. It was from Mr. Thompson, the night security guard at Northwind. He had documented not just her situation, but patterns he had observed for years: stolen work, ignored emails, unacknowledged projects. Each line on the paper was precise, coldly factual, but each carried the weight of countless injustices. Claire's jaw tightened. She could feel the heat rising to her face, a mixture of fear and righteous anger. She folded the note, tucking it into her apron pocket. She couldn't afford distraction, yet her mind raced. Holt Warner's acknowledgement was one thing, but if she wanted real justice, she needed proof. Solid, irrefutable proof. Email logs, document metadata, submission timestamps, all had to be organized, cross-referenced, ready for scrutiny. The thought made her stomach churn, but the alternative inaction was unbearable. By mid-afternoon, the bakery was crowded. Claire moved between tables, delivering coffee pastries, small smiles that never reached the weariness in her eyes. Her muscles burned from the repetitive motions of kneading and rolling dough earlier, but adrenaline sharpened her movements. Every order was precise. Every tip counted toward survival. She caught snippets of conversations, customers oblivious to the storm inside her. She glanced at the clock, 12 hours, until she would need to catch the evening bus to the freelance office, where another project waited. The bus ride was bitterly cold, snowflakes catching in her hair, melting as they touched her coat. Her mind spun with calculations, timelines, priorities, backup plans. Holt had requested she verify everything meticulously. Karen Douglas's history. Northwind's internal records, every instance of intellectual theft he could pursue proof would need to be beyond reproach. Claire imagined herself presenting the evidence to the board, every misstep, every act of deceit laid bare. She shivered partly from the cold, partly from anticipation. By 5 p.m., she arrived at the freelance office, the building modest but bustling fluorescent lights humming overhead. She unpacked her laptop, setting up dual screens, emails and spreadsheets side by side. Her fingers danced across the keys, pulling metadata, cross-referencing dates, highlighting inconsistencies. The room was silent, except for the occasional rustle of paper or hum of a printer. She moved quickly, aware that every minute mattered. Holt had emphasized urgency. The Easton Industries partnership depended on accurate attribution, and Claire's expertise was central. Hours passed with the intensity of a storm. The office clock ticked relentlessly, fluorescent lights flickering slightly above. Claire barely noticed hunger or thirst. Her mind was a machine scanning, comparing, highlighting. Each inconsistency she uncovered was another weapon, another piece of the truth that could not be ignored. The stress was relentless, but so was her determination. Every keystroke was a small act of defiance against the injustice Karen had inflicted. By 8 p.m., fatigue threatened to overtake her. Fingers cramped, eyes stung from staring at the screens. She took a deep breath, recalling her mother's pale face, the line of pills on the nightstand. She pressed on. The calculations, the logs, the emails all converged into a coherent pattern, a timeline of theft and misrepresentation. Karen's manipulation was systematic, deliberate, and Claire now had the evidence to prove it. Then, the phone vibrated. It was a secure line from Holt Warner. His voice was calm, measured, but carried unmistakable gravity. "Claire, you've done well. I've reviewed your preliminary compilation. Can you finalize the timeline and submit the annotated evidence before midnight?" Claire's heart surged. Midnight was arbitrary, but the weight of responsibility was not. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She worked with renewed intensity, every keystroke a hammer striking against the injustice she had endured. The clock crept closer to midnight, snow drifting against the window panes outside, city lights glowing dimly through the flurries. Emails were annotated, screenshots labeled, timestamps highlighted. Every step was precise, deliberate. She was no longer just an employee fighting for recognition. She was an agent of truth, a guardian of integrity in a system that had sought to erase her. Minutes before midnight, Claire leaned back, hands trembling but satisfied. The evidence was complete. Every stolen calculation, every misattributed spreadsheet, every instance of intellectual theft was documented. She imagined the faces in the boardroom when Holt presented it: disbelief, shock, the slow dawning of realization. Karen Douglas's carefully constructed web of deceit would unravel, and the recognition that had been denied for months would finally be hers. The bus ride home was quiet. Snow coated the streets in silence, muffling the sounds of the city. Claire's mind replayed the day, kneading dough, serving coffee, analyzing data, building a case that could not be ignored. She thought of her mother's steady breath in the small apartment, the faint glow of the nightlight. For the first time since her termination, she allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. Justice, when prepared meticulously, could not be denied. As she stepped inside her apartment, the warmth hit her, mingling with the adrenaline still thrumming through her body. Claire set her laptop down, reviewing the evidence one last time, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The files were ready for Holt, ready for the board. The storm of the day, emotion, exhaustion, betrayal, had condensed into a single purpose truth, irrefutable and undeniable. In the quiet, Claire allowed herself a brief pause, looking out the window at the snow-laden streets below. The city seemed vast, indifferent, but she felt a growing certainty that for the first time she had carved a place where her voice, her work, and her integrity could not be ignored. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation. Tomorrow would bring the boardroom. Tonight, she prepared meticulous, focused, unstoppable. She closed her eyes, imagining Holt's expression as the evidence was revealed, imagining the slow realization spreading across faces accustomed to privilege, the silent acknowledgement that a shy, overlooked analyst had built the foundation of their success. Claire Adams was ready. The snow continued to fall. The city held its breath. The reckoning had begun. The next morning, the streets of Chicago were slick with ice, and the remnants of overnight snow reflecting the neon signs and streetlights in jagged, trembling mirrors. Claire Adams stepped carefully onto the sidewalk, her coat pulled tight against the bitter wind laptop bag slung over one shoulder, the files from last night secured inside. Each step was deliberate. She moved as if the city itself was a gauntlet, every pedestrian and honking horn a reminder of the stakes she carried. Today was the day she would deliver the evidence to Holt Warner, the CEO who had recognized her talent, the man who could finally give voice to the injustice she had endured. She arrived at Easton Industries headquarters, a glass and steel monolith towering above the bustling streets. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and recycled air, the scent sterile but commanding. Security guards scanned each entrant with mechanical precision eyes, flicking to her badge before waving her through. Holt's assistant, a meticulous woman named Lauren with sharp gray hair and a calm, scrutinizing gaze, met her at the elevators. "Mr. Warner is ready for you," she said, voice soft but carrying authority. Claire nodded, throat tight. Every elevator ride felt like a descent into a chamber of judgment, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The office was on the 42nd floor, the city sprawling beneath floor-to-ceiling windows, skyscrapers gleaming like frozen waterfalls. Claire stepped inside the conference room, and Holt Warner rose from his chair, tall, broad-shouldered, his salt-and-pepper hair catching the morning light. His eyes were sharp, assessing not a flicker of pretense. "Good morning, Claire," he said. The voice was measured yet commanding a calm before the storm. Claire exhaled slowly. "Good morning, sir," she replied, placing the files carefully on the table. Holt's gaze swept over the documents, then returned to her. "I've reviewed your preliminary compilation," he said. "Now I need the annotated timeline with cross-referenced emails and metadata. Every claim must be airtight." Claire nodded, spreading the files across the table, fingers brushing the edges of spreadsheets and printouts. The weight of years of silent labor of stolen credit pressed down on her, but she was steady. She would not falter. As she began presenting the evidence, Holt listened without interruption, eyes narrowing slightly at each timestamp and email log. Claire spoke clearly, her voice low but precise. On September 14th, the preliminary model was submitted to Karen Douglas for departmental review. Revisions were sent on September 29th, with full implementation details finalized by October 18th. On October 20th, Karen Douglas submitted an identical version to senior leadership listed as primary author. The evidence is consistent across metadata email headers and submission records. She paused, letting the weight of the documentation sink in. Holt's jaw tightened. Lauren observed silently, taking notes, while Claire's pulse quickened. Each word she spoke was a test, not just of her evidence, but of her composure. Holt leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "This is meticulous," he said. "Impressive, considering the circumstances." Claire's throat constricted. She forced herself to breathe evenly. The room felt suspended in tension, the air charged with anticipation. Then Holt stood, walking deliberately to the window. He stared down at the city below, snow glinting on streets like scattered diamonds. "I need to see Karen Douglas," he said quietly, almost to himself, then turned sharply. "Summon the board of Northwind Manufacturing for a meeting within 24 hours. I want every executive, every senior manager present." The precision of his command left no room for negotiation. Claire felt the tremor of possibility run through her, a prelude to reckoning. Over the next several hours, Claire and Holt coordinated logistics. Emails were drafted, calls made, schedules adjusted. Each step required careful maneuvering to avoid alerting Karen prematurely. Claire observed Holt's methods calm, deliberate, strategic. He anticipated resistance, prepared countermeasures, mapped every scenario. She realized with a mixture of awe and relief that justice would not be chaotic. It would be executed with precision, leaving no ambiguity. Late that afternoon, Claire returned home, briefly stepping into her small apartment where the scent of her mother's herbal tea lingered. Ellen was seated in the armchair, knitting quietly, eyes occasionally lifting to watch the snow outside. "How was work?" she asked, voice tentative. Claire forced a smile, kneeling to press a kiss to her mother's temple. "Busy," she said simply. She didn't reveal the scope of the confrontation to come, knowing the tension in the city streets was already enough to weigh on her mother. Ellen nodded, returning to her knitting, a quiet anchor in the storm of Claire's life. By 6 p.m., Claire was back on the streets, heading to a small, quiet coffee shop that Holt had chosen for a private discussion. The shop was warm, aromatic, with the scent of roasted beans, dimly lit with pendant lamps, casting pools of gold across the wooden tables. Holt arrived moments later, his expression unreadable. He gestured to a table near the window, where the late light fell across the surface like a spotlight. "Sit," he said. Claire obeyed, careful not to disturb the papers she had brought. Holt's eyes scanned her face, sharp, analytical. "The Northwind Board will be surprised," he said finally. "They think they control everything. They will be blindsided by evidence that is irrefutable." Claire nodded, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. The weight of anticipation was nearly unbearable. "And if they deny it?" she asked softly. Holt's gaze met hers, unflinching. "They can deny facts, but they cannot deny proof. Everything is documented, every action traced. The story cannot be erased." He paused, letting the words settle. "This is about more than you, Claire. It's about the system, about exposing a pattern that has allowed abuse to continue for years. You are the first to have the courage and clarity to bring it forward." Claire's mind raced. She thought of the countless hours spent compiling logs, tracing emails, correlating timestamps, the nights she had lain awake, calculating the cost to her mother's medicine, the hours at the bakery and cafe she had endured to survive. All of it had led to this point, and yet the responsibility pressed heavier than she expected. Holt slid a small folder across the table. Inside are the final notes cross-referenced against Northwind's internal system. Review them once more. We leave nothing to chance. She flipped through the folder, the pages crisp, filled with data and highlights. She could see the narrative taking shape, a systematic pattern of theft and misrepresentation by Karen Douglas, repeated over years, affecting multiple employees, all unacknowledged, all silenced. Claire's pulse quickened. This was the moment her invisible labor would become undeniable, her voice finally amplified through the authority of someone who could enforce consequence. Outside, the snow had thickened, drifting against the windows, coating the city in muted white. Inside the coffee shop, the dim light and quiet hum of conversation contrasted sharply with the storm Claire felt inside. Holt stood, stretching his shoulders, calm and precise. "Tomorrow morning we present this," he said. "You will attend the board meeting. You will be heard. And finally, the truth will have a voice." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. The gravity of what lay ahead pressed down on her chest like a physical weight, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine Karen Douglas confronted, the pattern exposed, justice executed. The clock ticked toward 9 p.m. as they left the shop. Claire's footsteps crunched against the frozen sidewalks, each step echoing in the silent streets. Holt walked beside her, authoritative yet patient, a figure of unwavering resolve. "Rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow the boardroom becomes the stage, and your work, your life's labor, will finally be recognized." Claire exhaled, letting the tension drain slightly, though her mind refused to quiet. She thought of her mother, of the hours spent in unseen labor, of the stolen credit, the humiliation, and the loneliness. Tonight, for the first time, there was purpose to the exhaustion. Tonight, there was the promise of justice. In the quiet apartment, Ellen had prepared a small dinner, the aroma of roast chicken mingling with the soft glow of the lamp. Claire sank into the chair hand, still trembling from adrenaline. Holt's words echoed in her mind. The boardroom would be the reckoning, but she had to maintain composure, precision, and clarity. The night stretched ahead, long and silent, filled with preparation, strategy, and anticipation. Outside, the city slept beneath a thick blanket of snow, indifferent, yet beautiful, glittering under streetlights. Claire Adams sat quietly reviewing notes, rehearsing her words, steeling herself. The battle was approaching, and she would be ready. The reckoning was imminent, and tomorrow everything would change. The next morning, Claire Adams woke to a city coated in ice and early winter light, the streets glistening under the pale sun. She dressed quickly, choosing a navy blazer over a simple blouse, jeans pressed hair pulled back tight, projecting professionalism, even as her hands trembled slightly. The files were packed neatly in her laptop bag, evidence organized and annotated, every email, every spreadsheet, every timestamp cross-checked for accuracy. Today was the day she would enter the Northwind boardroom, confront the consequences of stolen labor, and assert the truth. Her pulse thrummed like a drumbeat in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Arriving at the headquarters, the building's glass facade reflected the gray sky, the towering structure cold and imposing. Claire stepped through the revolving doors. Badge scanned security eyes appraising her as usual, unaware of the storm she carried. She moved with measured steps down the marble corridor, the echo of her shoes sharp against the floors, mind rehearsing what she would say, how she would present herself, how she would withstand the scrutiny of 20 pairs of executive eyes. Holt Warner had instructed her to stay calm, to focus on facts, to let the evidence speak louder than emotions. The boardroom doors were open, revealing the long oak table, polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by the Northwind leadership, the CEO, Richard Hall, in his early 60s, shoulders broad, even in his tailored suit. Several vice presidents, department heads, and Karen Douglas, seated at the head, exuding her usual composure. Nails, red posture, immaculate, a picture of calculated confidence. Claire's breath caught. Every eye in the room turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, some dismissive. She could feel the weight of their assumptions, pressing down, a heavy air of doubt mingled with anticipation. Holt stepped beside her, tall, deliberate presence commanding. "Claire Adams," he said, voice even carrying authority that demanded attention. "This is the evidence you brought forward. The model, the emails, the project history. Everything is documented. I expect full transparency in this session." Claire nodded slightly, feeling a small tremor in her chest. Holt's gaze met hers briefly, a silent encouragement, before he turned to face the board. Karen Douglas's eyes flicked to Claire, sharp, calculating. There was a subtle smirk, a tilt of the head, as if she already believed she had prepared for every contingency. Claire approached the table, placing her laptop down, opening the files to the first spreadsheet. Her fingers brushed over the keys lightly, the screen illuminating her face in the soft glow. She cleared her throat. "I want to start by showing the timeline of the project submissions," she said, voice low but firm, carrying authority despite her years of invisibility. The room leaned in, some shifting in their chairs, murmuring quietly. The first slide displayed the dates, every document, every email, every adjustment made by Claire herself. She pointed to September 14th, explaining how the preliminary model had been submitted to Karen Douglas for review. September 29th showed her revisions, October 18th, the final comprehensive version. On October 20th, Karen had submitted an identical version to senior leadership listed as the primary author. Claire's eyes scanned the room, noting subtle reactions, a quick blink, a tightened jaw, fingers drumming on the table. Holt's hand rested lightly on the edge of the laptop, steady, reassuring. Every record, Claire continued, is cross-referenced against email headers and metadata. Every submission, every revision, every calculation can be traced to the original source. Her voice gained strength, confidence swelling as she realized the power of evidence in her hands. She had worked in silence for months, unnoticed, undervalued, and now she held irrefutable proof of her contribution and of Karen's systematic appropriation of credit. Karen's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Claire, these are internal procedures," she said, voice controlled, but edge cutting through the air. "My oversight of your work is part of standard managerial process. Nothing here suggests misconduct." A few heads nodded subtly, unsure. The room waited, silent tension thick. Claire's hands hovered over the laptop. She exhaled slowly. "Respectfully, Karen, these are not minor oversights. The metadata, the timestamps, the emails, they confirm the originality of my work. The model attributed to you on October 20th was fully created, developed, and finalized by me. Every improvement, every efficiency algorithm, every adjustment mine. The documentation leaves no ambiguity." Her words landed deliberately carefully, each syllable measured. A murmur spread across the boardroom chairs, creaking slightly as executives shifted. Holt spoke, cutting through the tension. "The evidence is clear," he said, gaze sweeping the room. "This is not a dispute over procedure. This is a matter of integrity, transparency, and accountability. Karen Douglas has benefited from work not her own. The patterns are consistent, deliberate, and verifiable." Claire glanced at the faces around the table. Some executives' expressions, hardened disbelief, mingled with the first hints of doubt. A junior manager, previously silent, leaned forward, eyes wide, fingers tapping nervously against the table. Karen's posture stiffened, the smirk gone, replaced by a faint pallor creeping over her cheeks. Claire could feel the shift. The room, previously confident in the authority of its hierarchy, now sensed the fragility beneath the surface. She brought up the next slide, showing multiple instances over the past 2 years, projects where credit had been reassigned, emails where contributions had been misrepresented, departures of talented employees quietly sidelined after similar misappropriations. Claire's voice was calm, precise. These examples are not isolated. They demonstrate a systematic pattern of misconduct that undermines not only employees but the company's integrity. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. I followed standard reporting channels," she murmured, but the conviction faltered under the weight of evidence. Holt leaned forward, voice firm. "Standard channels do not excuse falsification of authorship or deliberate misrepresentation. The board deserves to know the truth, and so do the employees whose work has been erased." Claire's heart thumped in her chest. She could feel the energy in the room shifting like the air itself had been pulled taut. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, fingers twitched over notepads. Holt gestured to Mr. Thompson, who had entered quietly carrying the notebook that had chronicled years of overlooked brilliance and stolen work. He set it on the table, flipping it open with deliberate care. Names, dates, project summaries, detailed annotations of each instance. The room fell silent, the magnitude settling in. Mr. Thompson, Holt said, voice steady, "You have maintained these records for how long?" The old man's hands, knotted with age, rested on the pages. 23 years, he replied, voice low, resonant, carrying the weight of decades of observation. "I've seen talented people leave forced out or ignored. I've seen credit, stolen careers dismantled quietly. I waited for someone who could act." The room absorbed the gravity, the significance of meticulous records corroborating Claire's claims. Karen shifted in her chair, fingers curling around the edge of the table, her face pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head minutely, realizing the web of deceit she had spun was unraveling before her eyes. Holt turned eyes sharp, addressing the board. "This is more than a personnel dispute. This is an issue of corporate ethics, systemic oversight, and accountability. The evidence presented here is indisputable. Actions will be taken immediately to correct the record, to restore credit, and to ensure integrity moving forward." Claire exhaled slowly, allowing herself a fraction of relief. The tension remained thick, but she sensed the first ripple of change, the initial crack in the facade of indifference that had allowed her labor to be erased. Holt's presence, Mr. Thompson's testimony, and the meticulously organized evidence had created an unassailable narrative. The board could not ignore it. As the clock ticked, Karen's defiance wavered her composure, eroding under the weight of facts and witnesses. Claire realized the culmination was near. She had stepped from invisibility into the spotlight, armed not with confrontation but with truth, methodical and undeniable. The boardroom, once a chamber of intimidation and hierarchy, had transformed into an arena of revelation and justice. Holt's eyes met Claire's briefly. There was acknowledgement there, subtle but firm, a recognition not of a subordinate, but of an equal in intellect and perseverance. Claire felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She had faced the storm, presented the truth, and the first wave of reckoning had begun. Outside, the winter light dimmed snow continuing to fall softly, a quiet mirror to the shifting tides within the Northwind boardroom. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, determination hardening. The day was far from over, and yet the pivot had occurred. The invisible labor, the silenced voice, the overlooked brilliance, they were now seen. The room had absorbed the truth, and she would not retreat. The reckoning was in motion, and Claire Adams would see it through to the end. Claire Adams spent the night in a restless fog, eyes staring at the ceiling, mind replaying every moment from the boardroom. Sleep had been tentative at best, the city lights filtering through thin curtains like streaks of judgment across her walls. The snow outside glistened untouched, casting silver reflections onto the hardwood floor. She dressed carefully in a simple blouse and tailored jacket, keeping her appearance neat but unassuming. Today she would return to Northwind Manufacturing for follow-up verification, accompanying Holt Warner as they systematically reviewed Karen Douglas's pattern of misconduct. They arrived mid-morning, the building still quiet, corridors empty except for the occasional janitor or maintenance staffer. Claire felt the familiar hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the scent of heated carpet, the metallic echo of footsteps on linoleum. Holt led the way with precise, measured steps, Claire following closely, laptop bag at her side, evidence files secured. "We need to go room by room," he said, voice calm but edged with authority. "Every document, every employee record, every correspondence, nothing can be overlooked. If Karen tried to cover this up, it won't hold." They entered the records room, walls lined with shelves of binders, folders, and archived reports. Claire set down her bag, flipping open a folder containing departmental emails from the past 5 years. Holt's eyes scanned rapidly, hands tracing patterns, pulling documents from shelves with surgical precision. Claire began cross-referencing timestamps, noting when files had been modified, identifying entries that had been reassigned or marked with Karen's name after initial submission by other employees. The air was heavy with anticipation, each discovery a small, potent victory. By midday, they moved to the Human Resources office. Holt dialed the head of HR, a woman named Patricia Clark, 50, professional and composed, who answered cautiously. "Ms. Clark, we need access to all project submissions attributed to Karen Douglas over the past 5 years, including metadata and internal communications," Holt said firmly. Claire watched the subtle shift in Patricia's posture, the way her fingers tightened around the phone. Holt's voice left no room for debate. "This is for verification before presenting findings to the board. Full transparency is required." Minutes later, they were handed encrypted files and access to the internal document management system. Claire's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, sorting, cross-referencing, verifying. Each discovery revealed a pattern: submissions from employees, quietly reassigned credit-stripped notices of praise filed under Karen's name. Every piece of evidence added to the narrative an unbroken chain of appropriation. Holt observed silently, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally glancing at Claire with a nod of approval. Around 2 p.m., Holt motioned Claire to follow him to the security office. Mr. Thompson, the veteran night guard, had agreed to meet in private. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his hands rested on the notebook he had maintained for decades. "I've been keeping records," Thompson said, voice low but steady. "Not for recognition, for accountability, for someone with authority to see what has been done to the quiet, overlooked employees." He opened the notebook carefully. Names, dates, brief descriptions, projects, stolen promotions, delayed careers, derailed. Each entry precise, written in meticulous handwriting, a chronicle of deliberate injustice. Claire's chest tightened as she flipped through the pages. Marcus Chen, a systems analyst, Jennifer Walsh, a quality manager, David Osman, process engineer, all talented, all undermined. The pattern was undeniable. "I've tried to report this before," Thompson continued, eyes meeting hers. "Twice to HR, twice ignored. Rules are followed, procedures cited, but nothing changes. The system protects those like Karen because she generates revenue. The quiet ones are considered replaceable." Holt leaned back in his chair, a grim expression on his face. "And now we have a chance to correct it. Claire, your compilation of the Easton Industries project data is the key. Combined with Thompson's records, we can present an indisputable case to the board." Claire's fingers trembled slightly, a mixture of adrenaline and the weight of responsibility. The boardroom confrontation would not just expose Karen, it would reveal systemic issues affecting every employee who had been silenced. They continued their work into the late afternoon. Claire organized digital files labeling each instance of misattribution, creating a visual map of projects, authors, dates, and outcomes. Holt Cross referenced her work with internal logs confirming patterns of deliberate obfuscation. Occasionally, Claire glanced at Holt, noting the precision with which he handled sensitive material. He did not speak much, but each nod, each glance carried confidence and reassurance. By early evening, the evidence was compiled into a presentation that could not be disputed. Claire reviewed it one last time, checking for inconsistencies, confirming the chronology. Holt stood, stretching his shoulders. "Tomorrow morning, the board sees everything. Every instance of theft, every ignored report, every employee undermined. This is not just about credit, it's about integrity. You, Claire, are the catalyst for exposing the truth." Claire exhaled a long, slow release. The tension of the day coiled in her shoulders, and yet a small sense of empowerment grew within her. She thought of her mother, Ellen, of the long hours spent working multiple jobs, of the sacrifices she had made to survive. The stakes were high, but the purpose was clear. This was not revenge. It was accountability, transparency, and justice for those who had been silenced. Holt walked to the window, looking out over the city as lights began to flicker on reflections glinting off the frozen streets. "Claire, your work has been meticulous. Your analysis, your persistence, your integrity, it will speak for itself." She nodded, trying to internalize the gravity of his words. The city below carried on, oblivious to the storm gathering inside the walls of Northwind Manufacturing. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing streets and rooftops, a quiet contrast to the tension inside. Late into the night, Claire returned home briefly, the apartment quiet and still. Her mother had gone to bed, the soft glow of a nightlight casting shadows on the walls. Claire placed the laptop on the kitchen counter, reviewing spreadsheets once more, confirming every timestamp, every email header, every annotation. The hours of meticulous work had created a record that could not be ignored. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe the cold night air seeping in through a slightly cracked window, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of tea left from the evening. She thought of the upcoming boardroom meeting, of Karen Douglas's carefully maintained image of the executives who had ignored complaints for years. Tomorrow, all of that would be challenged. Tomorrow, the quiet labor of overlooked employees would be seen. Claire's pulse quickened at the thought, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a flicker of satisfaction. The moment of reckoning was near. As she turned off the lights and settled into bed, Claire's mind refused to quiet. She envisioned the presentation, Holt's calm authority, Thompson's notebook laid open before the board, and the faces of those who had been wronged finally acknowledged. Sleep came in fragmented waves, dreams filled with numbers, spreadsheets and timelines, but underneath it all was a steady, growing confidence. She had done everything she could to prepare. Now the outcome would be determined not by emotion, but by evidence. Outside, the snow continued to fall soft and steady, covering the city in white. Inside, Claire lay awake, heart steady despite the storm around her. The fight was not over, but she had the tools, the evidence, and the allies needed. Holt Warner had placed trust in her, and Mr. Thompson's records had documented decades of silence. Tomorrow, the boardroom would no longer be a place of intimidation and control. It would be a place where truth and integrity could no longer be ignored. Claire Adams closed her eyes, ready for the dawn, ready for the confrontation, ready for justice. The morning air was sharp and biting as Claire Adams arrived at Northwind Manufacturing, the snow crunching under her boots. The building loomed above glass and steel, reflecting the pale winter sun, a silent testament to decades of production and profit. She walked with precise steps, laptop bag, secured files in order, mind rehearsing the confrontation she had prepared for months. The elevators were nearly empty, a few security personnel nodding at her with polite, curious expressions, unaware of the storm about to unfold within the boardroom. Holt Warner followed closely his presence, commanding without overt force. He held the room's authority in his stride, each step measured, deliberate. "Claire," he said quietly, "the board will not take kindly to surprises. Stick to the facts, present the evidence clearly, and let them see the pattern themselves. Do not falter." She nodded, throat-tight fingers brushing the laptop strap for reassurance. Every ounce of fear and anticipation surged through her chest, but she pushed it down, focusing on precision logic and truth. The boardroom doors opened, and they entered. The long table gleamed polished oak, reflecting the muted light from above. 23 executives, managers, and the CEO, Richard Hall, sat in calculated arrangement. Karen Douglas, 38, seated at the head, exuded calm confidence. Eyes, sharp posture, perfect. Her lips curved slightly, a practiced smirk that implied she anticipated victory. The room smelled faintly of leather coffee and the subtle antiseptic of corporate formality, and each breath Claire drew felt heavy with tension. Holt moved to the front, laptop in hand, connecting it to the screen at the head of the table. "Before we finalize any decisions regarding the Easton Industries partnership," he began, voice steady, controlled. "There is something that must be clarified." He turned to Claire. "This is your opportunity, Claire Adams." She stepped forward, pulse thrumming, heart hammering in her chest. Every eye in the room followed, some skeptical, some curious, others disdainful. Claire opened the first file, projecting the timeline onto the screen. On September 14th, the preliminary efficiency model was submitted to Karen Douglas for departmental review. She began, voice low but firm. Subsequent revisions were submitted on September 29th, finalized on October 18th. On October 20th, an identical version was presented to senior leadership under Karen Douglas's name as the primary author. Metadata, email timestamps, and submission logs confirm these facts. She paused briefly, letting the weight of the evidence settle in. A few executives shifted in their seats, murmuring softly, eyes flicking toward Karen. Karen's expression remained controlled, but there was a subtle tightening around her eyes, a brief pallor. She leaned back, fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Claire," she said, voice calm but measured, "these are standard internal procedures. Oversight of employee submissions is normal. Nothing here proves misconduct." Her gaze swept the room, looking for silent support. A few heads nodded cautiously, hesitant to confront a manager of her experience. Claire's jaw tightened. She knew the skepticism would be strong. She advanced to the next slide, detailing repeated instances over 5 years, project submissions, reassigned original authors, removed from credit lines, employees leaving under subtle pressure, all meticulously documented. "These are not isolated cases," she said, eyes scanning the boardroom. "This is a systematic pattern affecting multiple employees, every instance consistent with the misappropriation of work and deliberate obstruction of recognition." Holt interjected, voice clear, commanding. "The evidence is undeniable. This is not a question of procedure, it is a question of integrity. Karen Douglas has consistently benefited from the work of others, undermining both employees and corporate accountability." The room fell silent, the weight of Holt's words settling over every executive. Fingers drummed nervously on leather-bound pads, eyes darted to Karen, then to the projected documents. Claire moved to the next layer of proof, highlighting metadata irregularities, email logs, and document revisions that had been systematically manipulated. Each point was precise, verifiable, leaving little room for rebuttal. Holt stood slightly to the side, observing her delivery, the calm authority of his presence reinforcing the impact. The tension in the room thickened. Air seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Karen's composure cracked imperceptibly. Her hands flexed, then relaxed, then curled around the table edge. I maintained oversight," she said, voice tight, careful. "My submissions were part of procedural workflow." The words, however, lacked conviction, swallowed by the force of the evidence laid bare before the board. Holt's gaze remained fixed on the screen, unyielding. At that moment, Mr. Thompson entered the room, quietly carrying his notebook. The guard, 63, stooped slightly, but moved with deliberate care, placing the leather-bound book on the table. He opened it, revealing decades of meticulous records, names, dates, summaries of misappropriated projects, employee departures, notes on incidents quietly ignored by HR. Each page reinforced the narrative Claire had presented. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of papers and the faint tick of the wall clock. Holt's voice broke the silence. "These records corroborate every claim, every employee affected, every project stolen, every career undermined." He gestured to Claire. "This is the impact of her work and their obstruction. The board deserves full transparency." Heads turned, whispers faded, and all eyes fixed on the documents. Karen's smirk had vanished, replaced by subtle disbelief, fingers clutching the edge of her chair. Claire's hands hovered over her laptop, a brief flicker of hesitation, but she pressed on. The model being implemented for the Easton Industries partnership, the one attributed to Karen Douglas, is my creation. Every calculation, every algorithm, every analysis was conducted and finalized by me. The metadata confirms it beyond dispute. Holt leaned in slightly, his presence a shield and reinforcement. A vice president shifted uncomfortably, murmuring to a colleague, "She's right. The records, the emails, it all matches." Claire's pulse quickened, adrenaline sharp and steady. The boardroom was no longer merely a chamber of judgment, it had become a court of evidence. Every whisper of skepticism was countered by the undeniable facts displayed before them. Holt clicked through slides, showing the sequence of project submissions, discrepancies, and employee records. The visualization of data, the clean timeline of theft, painted a clear picture. Karen Douglas had built a reputation on the labor and intellect of others. Claire's eyes met those of various executives. Some looked surprised, some uncomfortable, none dismissive. The weight of the truth began to settle in the room. Karen attempted to speak again. "This is exaggerated standard workflow." Holt cut her off. Tone firm, unwavering. "Standard workflow does not justify falsifying authorship, altering metadata, or systematically erasing contributions. The board must act to rectify these wrongs and restore integrity. The words echoed final and precise, the authority in his voice leaving no room for debate. Claire felt a tremor of resolve within her. The evidence was not just numbers or documents. It was years of overlooked labor, silenced voices, invisible effort, now visible. Holt gestured to Mr. Thompson, who stood silently beside Claire, a witness and guardian of truth. The juxtaposition of meticulous records, documented evidence, and Claire's presentation left the board with no alternative. The deception had been revealed. The minutes stretched taut anticipation thick. Karen's face paled, further lips pressed, tight eyes darting, searching for allies for some escape. None came. The weight of the decades-long pattern pressed on her, undeniable. Holt's voice cut through the tension again, calm, commanding. Immediate action will be taken to correct records, restore credit, and ensure accountability. Karen Douglas will be suspended, pending a full investigation. Security will escort her from the premises. A collective exhale passed through the room. Karen sat frozen, the carefully constructed facade of composure crumbling. Claire felt a rush of relief, tempered with cautious restraint. The reckoning was underway, but she remained vigilant. Holt's gaze met hers briefly, approving a silent acknowledgement of her role, her persistence, her courage. The boardroom, once a space of hierarchy and intimidation, had transformed into a chamber of revelation and justice. Claire Adams had stepped from invisibility into recognition, her work integrity and resilience laid bare, undeniable. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the city unaware of the confrontation and triumph occurring within the walls of Northwind Manufacturing. The storm of injustice had been met with precision evidence and quiet strength, setting the stage for the next chapter in which Claire's brilliance and courage would be fully acknowledged. Claire Adams stood in the cold hallway outside the boardroom, the echo of the board's collective intake of breath still ringing in her ears. Her hands were steady on her laptop bag, though her pulse raced, hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that matched the city streets outside. Snowflakes drifted past the window, catching the morning light, tiny prisms dancing in the gray. She had walked through every scenario in her head, rehearsed each word, each gesture, each slide, yet nothing had fully prepared her for the weight of the response. Holt Warner remained beside her, silent, his posture taut, but relaxed, a quiet anchor of authority in the storm of vindication and tension. "Are you ready?" Holt asked, voice calm, low, carrying the authority of someone who knew every variable in play. Claire nodded, fingers tightening briefly on the strap of her bag. "I'm ready." They moved together down the corridor, approaching the HR office where Claire would receive formal confirmation of her reinstatement, plus the offer for a position reflecting her actual contributions. The air inside the building smelled faintly of office cleaner paper and polished metal, sterile but potent with the scent of authority and expectation. Patricia Clark. The head of HR opened the door immediately, her expression unreadable but tight, as if she had been bracing for this moment for some time. "Claire," she said, voice polite but clipped, "please come in." The office was small, lined with filing cabinets, each drawer a repository of employment history and corporate bureaucracy. A heater hummed softly, the only background sound beyond the occasional murmur of the building's operations. Claire stepped inside Holt, following placing the files on the desk. "I assume you've reviewed the documentation," Patricia said, sliding a thin stack of forms toward Claire. Her hands were precise, careful, revealing nothing but professionalism. Claire picked up the first form, scanning it quickly. The reinstatement letter, the revised contract, and the documentation acknowledging her creation of the efficiency model lay before her. Each line validated months of effort, struggle, and quiet suffering. Patricia cleared her throat. "The board has reviewed your evidence. Effective immediately, your employment status is reinstated and your contributions formally recognized. In addition, you are being offered the position of Senior Process Analyst with authority over projects similar to the one that was misappropriated. Salary adjustments reflect the scope of your work effective retroactively to the date of submission of your model. Claire's breath caught. Her fingers brushed over the top of the forms, hesitant, absorbing the reality. Holt's eyes met hers, a faint nod of acknowledgement, a silent reminder of the rigor that had brought them here. "You understand the responsibilities," Patricia continued, voice firm. "This role requires oversight training and guidance of junior analysts. It will not be an easy transition. The visibility and authority are significant, but so is the scrutiny." Claire nodded slowly. She felt the weight of the authority now in her hands, the power to influence not only her own career, but the integrity of the department and the recognition of other employees who had been overlooked. After signing the documents, Claire and Holt returned to her office, the space now strangely familiar yet imbued with new significance. Desks gleamed under the morning light, computers hummed quietly, and the faint aroma of coffee lingered from the break area. Employees passed some casting curious glances, others avoiding eye contact, sensing the subtle shift in the dynamics of authority. Claire settled at her desk, opening her laptop, reviewing the project files that would now carry her name officially. Every spreadsheet, every algorithm, every annotation felt heavier with purpose, a tangible representation of months of invisible labor now acknowledged. Holt lingered by the door. "I know this doesn't erase what happened," he said, voice low, deliberate. "But it does establish a record, restores accountability, and allows you to move forward with control. That is a kind of justice, albeit delayed." Claire exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "It's more than I dared hope for," she said. "But it's not just for me. It's for everyone who was silenced, overlooked, or dismissed." Holt nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the hint of a smile. The afternoon passed in a blur of formalities and meetings. Claire called her mother, Ellen, who answered with a tentative, worried voice. "Mom, I'm okay," Claire said. Everything's been sorted. The company recognized my work. I'm back officially, and the position reflects what I actually contributed." There was silence on the other end, then a small, breathless laugh. "Claire." "I don't even know what to say," her mother whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Claire felt a warmth spread through her chest, a grounding counterpoint to the months of stress and uncertainty. Later, she returned to her desk reviewing emails, planning projects, and preparing to brief her team on the upcoming workflow changes. She observed junior analysts moving through the office, some timid, others confident, unaware that the model they had once seen attributed to someone else was now rightfully hers. Claire thought about the responsibility that came with recognition, the expectation to mentor, to guide, to ensure that no one's work would again be appropriated without acknowledgement. She felt the magnitude of authority, not as power for herself, but as stewardship for others. By evening, the office was quieter, only a few employees lingering at their desks. Claire stood looking out the window at the city lights glittering against the snow-dusted streets. The wind carried the faint scent of exhaust and melting snow, and she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had faced months of invisibility theft of credit and professional marginalization. Now the world had acknowledged her contributions, and she had the means to protect and elevate others. Her phone buzzed with a message from Holt. "Prepare for tomorrow, board presentation. The evidence will be presented again publicly for company-wide acknowledgement. Be ready to speak." Claire's pulse quickened not with fear, but with focus. The culmination of weeks of meticulous work and planning was approaching. She would not be passive. She would not be silent. The room, the city, the company, all were poised to witness the truth. That night, Claire returned home to her small apartment. Ellen asleep in her chair, the room bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight. Claire placed her laptop on the counter, reviewing the documents one final time, rehearsing points she would emphasize to ensure clarity and impact. The snow outside continued to fall, layering the streets in white, muffling the noise of the city, creating a rare silence. Claire drew a deep breath, feeling the tension of months condense into a moment of clarity. She thought about Karen Douglas poised in her own home, unaware of the precise, irrefutable documentation about to confront her. She thought about the colleagues whose work had been overlooked, whose contributions had been stolen, and about the system that had allowed this to happen unchecked for years. Claire's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of responsibility, the gravity of justice finally within reach. By midnight, Claire lay in bed reviewing her mental notes, rehearsing the words she would speak, the evidence she would highlight. The city outside was quiet streets, glistening snow falling steadily, a blanket of cold serenity covering the world. Inside, Claire felt the pulse of anticipation, a quiet fire burning with purpose and resolve. Tomorrow, she would not simply attend a meeting, she would preside over a reckoning. The stolen credit, the unseen labor, the injustice, the culmination of months of effort would finally be acknowledged. She closed her eyes, the weight of preparation heavy but necessary, and for the first time in months allowed herself the thought that her work, her integrity, and her persistence might finally alter the course of the company and perhaps even the lives of those who had been silenced before her. Claire Adams arrived at Northwind Manufacturing early the next morning, the streets still slick from the overnight snow sunlight bouncing off icy patches like fractured mirrors. She adjusted her blazer laptop bag in hand, taking a deep breath before entering the towering glass building. The lobby was quiet, polished floors, reflecting the pale winter light, and security personnel nodded as she passed without a word. Today was not just another meeting. Today would determine whether months of unseen labor, meticulous analysis, and stolen credit would finally be recognized and corrected. Holt Warner met her at the elevator, his presence calm, deliberate, a steadying force. "Remember," he said quietly, "stick to the facts. Do not allow emotion to distract you. Let the evidence speak for itself. The board will see clearly what has been hidden for years." Claire nodded, throat tight. The elevator ascended slowly, each floor passing like a countdown to confrontation. The faint hum of machinery and distant city sounds filtered through the building, but inside the elevator time seemed compressed, the air taut with anticipation. They entered the boardroom just before the scheduled start, the doors opening onto a long, polished oak table. All 23 members of the board, along with the CEO, Richard Hall, and Karen Douglas, were already seated. Karen's posture was perfect. Her hands folded neatly in front of her eyes, sharp and calculating. Her expression carried the faintest trace of a smirk, a practiced mask of confidence. Claire's pulse raced. Holt gestured for her to set up the laptop connecting to the projector. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft click of the connection, a prelude to the storm. Claire cleared her throat, projecting calm, steady energy. "Good morning," she began, voice measured but firm. "Today I will present evidence documenting the authorship and contributions of the efficiency model implemented for the Easton Industries Partnership and the repeated pattern of misappropriation by Karen Douglas over the past 5 years." She advanced the first slide, showing the timeline of her initial submission on September 14th, the revisions on September 29th, and the final model, finalized on October 18th, all submitted for departmental review. On October 20th, the model had been submitted to senior leadership under Karen Douglas's name. She paused briefly, letting the data sink in. Holt's eyes were on her, calm and reassuring, a silent signal to continue. Claire's gaze swept the room, noting reactions. Some executives leaned forward, interest peaked. Others shifted in their chairs, eyebrows raised in surprise or disbelief. Karen's lips pressed thin, the faintest twitch betraying her anxiety beneath the polished facade. Claire continued metadata from the document management system, email headers, and submission timestamps confirm the authorship of every calculation, algorithm, and analysis. This is not a matter of opinion. It is demonstrable fact. Holt interjected briefly, his voice firm but controlled. The pattern is clear. Multiple employees' work has been misattributed, removed, or rebranded under Karen Douglas's name. The evidence compiled by Claire, corroborated by decades of security logs and HR records, shows a consistent, deliberate pattern of appropriation and suppression of talent. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring under their breath. The weight of irrefutable proof settled over the room. Claire advanced the next slide, detailing specific cases over the past 5 years. She highlighted projects, stolen timelines, manipulated promotions, delayed, and employees quietly sidelined. Names and dates were listed, each example meticulously annotated. "This is not isolated," Claire said, voice firm, controlled, resonant. "This is systemic. 8 employees left the company, their contributions erased, their careers disrupted as documented in the logs provided by Mr. Thompson, Northwind's night security officer, who has maintained a record of these incidents for over 2 decades. Karen shifted slightly, attempting to regain composure. "These are procedural misunderstandings," she said, voice precise but lacking conviction. "Oversight and submission adjustments are standard in workflow management. Nothing here constitutes misconduct." She glanced around, hoping for support from other executives, but the evidence projected on the screen left little room for argument. Claire pressed on, advancing to slides showing email chains, document metadata, and timestamps, demonstrating how original submissions were reassigned, revisions overwritten, and credit misattributed. Every step, every submission, every adjustment is verifiable. The Easton Industries model attributed to Karen Douglas is mine. Every calculation, every optimization, every efficiency analysis belongs to me. The evidence leaves no ambiguity. A murmur ran through the room, chairs creaking, the faint shuffle of papers as board members processed the information. Karen's hands tightened around the edge of the table, lips pressed, thin eyes darting to find allies. None came. Holt's gaze remained fixed on the projected slides, unyielding, precise. The silence in the room was heavy, tense, almost audible, the collective realization of wrongdoing settling in. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, placing his leather-bound notebook on the table. The pages revealed decades of detailed documentation, employee names, project summaries, dates of departure, patterns of misappropriation. His hands knotted and lined rested over the notebook. "I've kept these records to maintain accountability," he said, voice low but resonant. "I've witnessed talented employees leave silently, dismissed their work, claimed by others. This is the culmination of what I observed." Claire felt a surge of resolve. The evidence was undeniable, comprehensive, meticulously compiled. Holt gestured subtly, signaling her to summarize the final findings. "This is not a personal dispute," Claire said, voice steady, clear. "This is a matter of ethics, integrity, and accountability. Every instance demonstrates deliberate misappropriation and the silencing of employees who contributed their expertise. The company's reputation and operational integrity depend on recognizing and correcting these injustices." Holt addressed the board directly. "The consequences must be immediate. Records will be corrected, credit restored, and Karen Douglas will be suspended pending investigation. Security will escort her from the premises." The words landed with the weight of inevitability. Karen's face went pale, her carefully maintained poise collapsing imperceptibly. Fingers flexed and unclenched around her chair. For the first time, she seemed small, ordinary, vulnerable. Claire exhaled slowly, a tension she had carried for months releasing in a measured breath. Holt's eyes met hers briefly, acknowledgement without words. She had endured months of erasure, humiliation, and uncertainty. Now the tide had shifted. The quiet, overlooked work she had poured her mind and effort into was finally recognized, validated, and defended by authority. The boardroom was no longer a chamber of intimidation. It had become a tribunal of truth. Minutes passed the room silent, except for the soft shuffle of papers and the distant hum of building systems. Holt turned to Claire. "You have presented your case flawlessly. The integrity of your work is now unassailable. The company and the board cannot deny it. This is the power of meticulous preparation and courage." Claire felt a subtle warmth spread through her chest, a quiet satisfaction tempered with lingering tension. The confrontation had occurred, but the consequences would ripple through the company for years. Outside the boardroom windows, snow continued to fall, coating streets, cars, and sidewalks. The city seemed indifferent, unaware of the seismic shift occurring within the corporate walls. Claire watched the flakes drift past, each one fragile, unique, yet together forming a blanket over the world, a subtle mirror of the recognition of her work. Small individual acts, unnoticed for months now, converging into undeniable truth. As she packed her laptop and files, Claire allowed herself a brief reflection. The long months of invisible labor, late nights, and personal sacrifice had led to this moment. Holt's guidance. Mr. Thompson's meticulous records and her own persistence had created a convergence impossible to ignore. She realized that recognition was not merely for her. It was for the culture of fairness within Northwind, for every employee who had been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. Karen Douglas was escorted quietly by security, the facade of control completely dissolved. Claire noticed the subtle shifts in the board members' expressions, shock, disbelief, a dawning understanding of the patterns they had ignored. The weight of accountability now hung over the room. Holt placed a hand lightly on Claire's shoulder, grounding her. "You've changed the narrative, not just for yourself, but for the company. Never underestimate the power of truth." Claire left the boardroom, pulse still racing, the snow outside crisp and biting. She felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and cautious anticipation. This was not the end, but the beginning. The recognition of her labor, the correction of systemic injustice, and the ripple effect through the company's culture had been set in motion. She could finally breathe just a little, knowing that her persistence, integrity, and expertise had prevailed. In the quiet of the afternoon, Claire sat by the window of the office cafeteria, watching the city move below, people oblivious to the transformation that had taken place within the building. She thought of her mother Ellen waiting at home, and of the months of sacrifice and invisible effort that had led to this point. The boardroom reckoning had confirmed not just her contributions, but the principle that truth and diligence, when wielded carefully and persistently, could not be silenced indefinitely. Claire exhaled, steadying her hands over her laptop, reviewing the final documents once more, ensuring every note, every timestamp, every corroborating detail was intact. Tomorrow would bring communication to the wider staff, formal acknowledgement, and the beginning of cultural change at Northwind. The snow continued to fall outside, layering the streets in quiet white, a serene counterpoint to the intense upheaval within. Claire Adams had stepped fully into recognition, her work integrity and courage now undeniable, and the next chapter of her life and career awaited solidly anchored in truth and justice. Claire Adams walked into the office that morning with a strange combination of calm and focus, the snow outside softening the city's edges like a filter on the world she had fought so hard to influence. The boardroom had been quiet the previous day, but today the air was thick with anticipation, whispered conversations, and the soft clatter of keyboards as employees checked emails. Claire's steps were deliberate, measured, yet inside her pulse was a drumbeat of restrained adrenaline. The recognition she had earned was real, but translating that into action, into change, would require every ounce of her attention and resolve. Holt Warner met her at the elevator, a brief nod, conveying approval and reassurance. "This is your day," he said, voice low but firm. "The staff will see the outcome today. Everything is documented, every contribution restored. Stay composed. Let them see the work and the principle behind it." Claire exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle across her shoulders. Composure was everything. She had learned that over months of invisible labor, unnoticed contributions, and carefully documented injustice. The boardroom doors opened and Claire stepped through, not into confrontation, but into a moment that had been building for months. Karen Douglas was already seated, eyes fixed, posture rigid, face composed but taut with anticipation. The board and senior staff were present, arranged around the table like an audience awaiting a performance. The room smelled faintly of polished wood coffee, and the metallic hint of technology blending into a scent that had become synonymous with authority and oversight. Claire set her laptop down, connecting it to the projector. Holt gestured subtly for her to begin. "Today," Claire said, voice steady, "we will acknowledge the contributions of employees whose work has been misrepresented, misappropriated, or ignored. This is not about blame alone. It is about restoring integrity, transparency, and fairness to our processes." Her eyes swept the room, noting subtle expressions of surprise, discomfort, and curiosity. She advanced to the first slide, showing the timeline of her Easton Industries model. On September 14th, the preliminary model was submitted for departmental review. Claire began pointing to highlighted entries on the spreadsheet. September 29th, revisions were submitted. October 18th, the final comprehensive model was completed. October 20th, the identical model was submitted to senior leadership under Karen Douglas's name. Metadata timestamps and email headers verify the authorship of every calculation algorithm and efficiency adjustment. Every step is documented. A quiet murmur ran through the room. Some executives leaned forward, eyes narrowing as they processed the clarity of the evidence. Karen's fingers flexed against the table edge, her composure cracking imperceptibly. Claire moved through the slides, layering in additional examples, projects, reassigned reports, overwritten patterns of misattribution affecting multiple employees over years. Names, dates, and details were presented with precision, a mosaic of accountability forming before the board. Holt Warner stepped in at key moments, providing context and emphasizing the broader significance. "The pattern is systematic," he said, voice-controlled, resonant. "This is not an isolated oversight. It demonstrates a deliberate and repeated misappropriation of labor and intellect. The company and its employees deserve acknowledgement and corrective action." He gestured subtly toward Claire, signaling the final layers of evidence to be presented. Claire advanced the next slides, highlighting corroborating notes from Mr. Thompson, the night security officer who had documented the silent departures and unrecognized contributions of employees over 23 years. The board watched silent, absorbing the weight of decades of meticulous observation. Each page turned, each annotation revealed, strengthened her position. The room's energy shifted. Doubt, curiosity, and realization began to ripple through the executives like an undercurrent. Karen Douglas attempted to interject. "These are procedural adjustments," she said, voice clipped careful. "Oversight and review are standard managerial responsibilities. Nothing here demonstrates intentional misconduct." Her eyes scanned the room, seeking support, but the subtle tension indicated that the board was considering the weight of evidence, not allegiance to her narrative. Claire's voice did not waver. "Respectfully, Karen, this is not about procedure alone. The evidence confirms authorship submission and manipulation of credit. The Easton Industries model implemented under your name was my creation. Every optimization, Every efficiency, calculation, every workflow adjustment is verifiable and attributable to me. The records leave no ambiguity. Holt's presence beside her reinforced the authority of the presentation. The boardroom was quiet, save for the faint rustle of papers and the occasional shift of a chair. Holt turned slightly, acknowledging Mr. Thompson, who had entered quietly holding his decades-long notebook. He placed it on the table, opening it to reveal years of meticulously logged incidents, stolen work, silenced employees, manipulated reports, careers quietly derailed. The weight of documentation was tangible, a testament to persistence and truth. Holt's voice rose, measured but commanding. Immediate corrective action will be taken. Records will be amended, contributions restored, and Karen Douglas is suspended pending investigation. Security will escort her from the premises. Karen's face paled, lips pressing into a thin line, eyes darting helplessly across the room. The carefully curated control she had maintained over the narrative collapsed. Claire felt a surge of calm resolve. Her months of preparation, silent perseverance, and meticulous documentation had led to this moment. The room's hierarchy had shifted. Authority not just of title, but of truth and integrity had been restored. Employees whose work had been dismissed or stolen were no longer invisible. Every algorithm, every spreadsheet, every line of code she had painstakingly crafted was acknowledged and attributed correctly. The boardroom slowly exhaled. Executives exchanged glances, murmurs of acknowledgement and incredulity weaving through the space. Holt's gaze met Claire's briefly, a subtle nod of recognition and approval. The power of evidence, methodical preparation, and unwavering integrity had transformed the environment. The room had become a chamber of accountability, not intimidation. Later, Claire walked through the office observing colleagues. Some paused, glancing her way with newfound respect. Others nodded silently, absorbing the visible acknowledgement of her contributions. Junior analysts who had once hesitated to speak up now approached her quietly, seeking guidance, reassurance, and mentorship. Claire realized that recognition was not merely personal. It was cultural, an opportunity to influence the company's ethos and the treatment of talent in the future. By mid-afternoon, Claire returned to her desk. She opened the Easton Industries project files, reviewing annotations and planning the next steps for workflow oversight. Holt's words echoed in her mind. The objective was not vengeance, but restoration and leadership. She had been given the tools, the authority, and the platform to ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability. Her role had shifted from overlooked analyst to steward of integrity. Later that evening, Claire called her mother. Ellen answered, voice tentative. Claire. How did it go? Claire's lips curved in a faint smile. It's done, Mom. They recognized everything. My work, all of it. I'm back officially, and the position reflects my contributions. There was silence, then a soft, breathless laugh. I'm so proud of you, her mother whispered. You did it. Claire felt a warmth spread through her chest, grounding her amidst the intensity of the day. As night fell, snow drifted across the city streets, reflecting streetlights in glinting shards of light. Claire sat at her desk, reviewing emails, preparing presentations, and organizing training materials for her team. Junior employees now had a visible mentor, someone whose perseverance had reshaped the recognition and culture of the company. Claire's thoughts turned to months of quiet labor, of unseen effort, and the ripple effect of finally being acknowledged. The injustice had been corrected, but the impact would extend far beyond her alone. The city outside moved in its familiar rhythm, oblivious to the transformation inside Northwind Manufacturing. Claire closed her laptop for the night, allowing herself a moment of reflection and satisfaction. The stolen credit, the silence, the overlooked labor, all had been accounted for. The boardroom reckoning had secured recognition and restored integrity. Holt's mentorship, Mr. Thompson's meticulous records and her own diligence had converged to create justice, methodical and complete. Claire leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting to the window at the softly falling snow, a quiet smile forming. The struggle was over, but the work of stewardship had just begun. Her contributions would now serve not only her career, but the culture and ethics of the company she loved. She allowed herself a deep breath, a rare release of tension. The months of struggle, exhaustion, and invisibility had led to this moment of triumph. Later, she posted a brief note on the internal company portal, acknowledging her team, outlining the corrective measures, and offering mentorship and support. Her fingers lingered over the keyboard, each word deliberate, precise, reinforcing accountability, transparency, and empowerment. She signed it, leaned back, and let the silence of accomplishment fill the room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the city calm under a white blanket. Claire Adams, once invisible, now carried authority, recognition, and responsibility. The storm of injustice had been met, confronted, and resolved, leaving a legacy of fairness and integrity in its wake. If you felt inspired by Claire's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment now.